Let me start with a truth most men are never told, not because it's cruel, but because it's uncomfortable. A woman can genuinely care about you, even love you, and still slowly take you for granted. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't come from bad intentions. It happens quietly, through familiarity, comfort, and the assumption that you'll always be there. Most men believe that consistency guarantees appreciation, that showing up, being patient, understanding, and emotionally available will naturally deepen connection. But real human psychology doesn't always work that way. When effort becomes predictable and presence becomes guaranteed, appreciation can fade without either person realizing it. And here's the part that surprises most men. The shift doesn't happen when you argue. It doesn't happen when emotions are loud. It happens when you stop chasing, when your energy pulls back, when your name stops appearing on her phone the way it used to. That silence doesn't just create distance, it creates awareness. This isn't about blaming women or encouraging emotional games. It's about understanding a dynamic that plays out every day between good men and women who never intended to lose them. Because when a man finally steps back, not in anger, not in resentment, but in quiet self-respect, something changes. And that change is where the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. One of the biggest misunderstandings in modern relationships is the belief that love automatically protects connection, that if two people care about each other, appreciation will stay intact on its own. In reality, love doesn't eliminate complacency. Comfort creates it. When a woman feels emotionally secure with a man, when she knows he's consistent, patient, and unlikely to leave, her nervous system relaxes. And while that safety is healthy, it can slowly turn into unconscious neglect, not because she stops caring, but because she stops noticing. His effort becomes the background noise of her life rather than something she actively values. This is where many good men get confused. They're not doing anything wrong. They're showing up, listening, supporting, and staying steady. But over time, that steadiness becomes expected instead of appreciated. The emotional balance shifts. The man gives more. The woman begins to assume more. Most women don't wake up thinking, I'm going to take him for granted today. It happens in small moments. Delayed replies, less curiosity, less emotional reciprocity. Boundaries soften, standards blur. And because the man keeps showing up, the dynamic quietly reinforces itself. The danger isn't love fading, it's awareness fading. And when awareness fades, appreciation follows. Until something interrupts the pattern, until the man who was always there isn't. That's when the emotional system recalibrates. And that's when the dynamic begins to change. Not because of conflict, but because of absence. Most men assume that if a woman starts to feel distant, the solution is to lean in harder. More messages, more reassurance, more effort. But the moment that truly changes the dynamic is not when you do more, it's when you stop. When a man who was once consistent suddenly becomes quiet, it creates a disruption in emotional rhythm. At first, it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels confusing. A missed text, a day without checking in, a noticeable absence where presence used to be guaranteed. And that's when awareness quietly returns. This isn't about punishment or strategy, it's about contrast. When your attention was constant, it blended into the background of her life. When it's gone, it becomes impossible to ignore. Silence doesn't shout, but it echoes. And in that echo, questions begin to form. Why hasn't he reached out? Is he upset? Did I push too far? Is he moving on? What many men don't realize is that emotional distance often functions as a test, not always a conscious one, but a subconscious expectation that you'll chase, explain, or re-engage. When you don't, it interrupts the script she assumed would play out. And that interruption is powerful. Because now she's not reacting to your effort, she's reacting to your absence. The emotional focus shifts. Instead of feeling pursued, she starts feeling uncertain. Instead of feeling in control, she starts feeling the loss of control. That's when missing someone truly begins, not through conflict or confrontation, but through the quiet realization that the man who once centered her attention has redirected it back to himself. Arguments feel intense, but they often keep emotional connection alive. Even when things are tense, conflict still means engagement. It means energy is being exchanged. It means both people are still emotionally invested. That's why arguments rarely create clarity. They create noise. Silence works differently. When a man stops reacting, stops explaining, and stops trying to be understood, the emotional feedback loop breaks. There's no tension to respond to, no words to counter, no reassurance to lean on. And in that quiet space, reflection begins. Silence removes distraction. Without your voice constantly present, she's left with her own thoughts. And those thoughts don't stay neutral for long. They revisit moments that were brushed off. They replay conversations that felt unfinished. They start connecting emotional dots that weren't visible before. This is why silence often feels heavier than confrontation. There's no script for it, no clear role to play, no certainty about where things stand. And uncertainty is uncomfortable, especially when it replaces a sense of emotional control. For many women, the absence of reaction feels more significant than anger ever did. Anger suggests you still care. Silence suggests you may have moved on. And that possibility forces an internal check-in. Not because you demanded it, not because you accused her, but because your energy changed. Silence doesn't convince, it reveals. It shows whether the connection was built on genuine mutual presence or on the assumption that you would always be there no matter what. And once that assumption breaks, awareness returns quickly, sometimes faster than either person expected. When a woman begins to miss a man she once took for granted, it's rarely because of the big gestures. It's not the expensive dates or dramatic moments that stay with her. It's the small, consistent things, the ones that felt ordinary at the time, but irreplaceable in hindsight. She remembers how you checked in without being asked, how you noticed shifts in her mood before she said a word, how you remembered details she mentioned casually, not because you were trying to impress her, but because you were genuinely paying attention. Those moments didn't stand out when they were happening. They blended into the rhythm of everyday life. Consistency has a strange effect. When it's present, it feels normal. When it's gone, it feels empty. At the time, those efforts may have seemed invisible. She may have assumed they were simply part of who you were, something she could rely on without thinking twice. But once they disappear, the contrast becomes sharp. Other connections don't offer the same emotional ease, the same patience, the same sense of being quietly supported. And that's when realization sets in. She doesn't just miss you. She misses how she felt around you. Understood, steady, emotionally safe. She notices the difference when someone else reacts instead of listens, when someone else withdraws instead of staying grounded. What was once taken for granted becomes a reference point, a standard she didn't know she was setting. And by the time she understands the value of what she had, you're no longer there to provide it. That absence doesn't shout. It lingers, and it changes how she remembers you. When awareness starts to settle in, it doesn't always show right away. On the outside, everything may look the same. She appears calm, unbothered, maybe even distant. But internally, something has shifted. Many women are skilled at maintaining composure, especially when they feel vulnerable. Admitting regret too quickly can feel like a loss of control. So instead, emotions get managed quietly. She stays busy, distracts herself, keeps moving forward on the surface, even while her thoughts keep circling back. This is where confusion often happens. From the outside, it may look like she's unaffected or has already moved on, but internally, she's replaying conversations, questioning moments she once dismissed, wondering whether she misread your patience as indifference or your consistency as something that didn't require care. There's also a protective instinct at work. Reaching out too soon risks rejection. It risks discovering that you're truly gone. So she waits, observes, watches from a distance, not to manipulate, but to understand whether the door is still open or if it's quietly closing. During this phase, emotions aren't dramatic. They're subtle and persistent. A thought at night, a moment of comparison, a quiet sense that something meaningful has shifted. And the longer the silence continues, the harder it becomes to deny what's really happening. because no amount of distraction replaces emotional connection, and no outward confidence fully quiets the realization that something important may have been lost. When a woman realizes she may have taken a good man for granted, an internal conflict begins. It's not always visible, but it's intense. On one side is emotion, the part that misses your presence, your steadiness, the way you made her feel. On the other side is ego, the part that wants to protect her pride and avoid vulnerability. Ego often speaks first. It says, don't reach out. If he cared enough, he would come back. Stay strong, don't show weakness. This isn't cruelty, it's self-protection. Admitting fault requires humility, and humility feels risky when there's uncertainty about how the other person will respond. But emotion doesn't disappear just because ego resists it. It surfaces in quiet moments, late at night, during ordinary routines, when something small triggers a memory, and each time it resurfaces, the emotional side gains a little more ground. That's when subtle behaviors appear. Curiosity replaces indifference. She might check to see how you're doing without making contact. Notice changes in your energy. Wonder whether you're happier, calmer, or simply different without her. Ego still tries to hold the line, but emotion keeps pressing, because emotional bonds don't dissolve on command. They fade only when they're processed, and silence forces that process to happen internally. Eventually, one of two things occurs. Either ego maintains control and the connection remains unresolved, or emotion outweighs pride and awareness turns into honest reflection. And that moment, when emotion finally breaks through, is often when missing you transforms into something deeper. Not longing, not curiosity, but regret for what wasn't fully valued when it was still present. Absence alone can create reflection, but growth changes everything. When a woman notices that you didn't collapse after stepping away, that your life continued, improved, and expanded, it creates a different kind of emotional response. It's not about showing off or trying to prove anything. The difference is always felt. A man who is performing for attention moves loudly. A man who is genuinely evolving moves quietly, with ease. And that quiet confidence is impossible to ignore. When she sees you calmer, healthier, more focused, or simply more at peace, it challenges an assumption she may not have realized she was holding. The assumption that your emotional stability depended on her presence, that you would pause your life waiting for clarity or validation. Instead, she sees something else. A man who redirected his energy inward, who chose growth over reaction, who didn't need bitterness to move forward. That shift creates a psychological reversal, where once she evaluated your value, now she feels evaluated by your absence. Not because you're judging her, but because your life is no longer oriented around her response. And that's when the realization becomes difficult to avoid. She wasn't the center of your stability. You were, and the version of you that exists now feels more grounded than the one who stayed despite imbalance. This moment often brings mixed emotions. Pride may resist it, curiosity may grow, regret may quietly surface. Because seeing someone thrive without you forces a simple but uncomfortable question. Was I part of his growth or part of what he had to outgrow? And that question stays longer than silence ever could. Silence is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like avoidance or emotional withdrawal, but in reality, there's a difference between disappearing and stepping back with intention. When a man chooses silence after feeling unvalued, it's rarely about making a statement. It's about restoring balance, about creating space where clarity can exist without constant emotional negotiation. Silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't demand, it doesn't explain, and that's precisely why it carries weight. For someone who has grown accustomed to your emotional availability, your quiet presence forces reflection. Not because you're withholding affection as leverage, but because you've stopped overextending where there was no reciprocity. This kind of silence shifts the emotional responsibility inward. There's no reassurance to lean on, no immediate response to soften uncertainty. And in that space, feelings surface naturally, not because they're provoked, but because they're no longer being distracted. Self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's communicated through consistency with your own values. through choosing peace over explanation, through trusting that those who truly valued your presence will feel the difference when it's gone. And here's the most important part. Silence isn't about waiting for someone to miss you. It's about allowing yourself to recalibrate without being pulled back into a dynamic that no longer serves you. If someone becomes aware of your value through that absence, it's a result, not the goal. The goal is alignment with yourself, with your standards, with a life that doesn't require you to constantly prove your worth. Being treated as replaceable rarely starts with disrespect. It starts with imbalance. One person consistently gives more time, more attention, more emotional energy, while the other slowly adjusts to receiving without matching that effort. Many men don't notice when this shift begins. They tell themselves that patience is strength, that understanding will eventually be appreciated, that love means endurance. And while those qualities are valuable, they become damaging when they're offered without boundaries. When availability has no limits, it loses definition. When forgiveness has no standard, it loses meaning. Over time, the dynamic teaches the other person something, not intentionally, but clearly, that your presence is guaranteed, regardless of how you're treated. This isn't about women being dismissive or men being weak. It's about human behavior responding to patterns. People value what has weight, and weight comes from choice, not obligation. The moment a man starts feeling like an option instead of a priority is the moment he needs to pause, not to demand change, but to observe the dynamic honestly. Because staying in a position where your effort isn't matched quietly reinforces the very treatment you're hoping will improve. Respect doesn't grow from persistence alone. It grows from self-regard, from knowing when to give and when to step back, from recognizing that your energy is not an unlimited resource. When a man begins to treat his time, attention, and emotional presence as valuable, others respond accordingly. And when they don't, that response becomes information, not a verdict on your worth, but a signal to realign with what you deserve.